Welcome. Today we're going to talk about what's a typical overhead and profit in construction. So I'm assuming that question means how much markup should you put on a job? What's a typical percentage or amount of money? So I've done a lot of study on this. I study the Construction Financial Management Association financial resource. Every year they spit out the annual overhead and profits of major companies throughout the United States, mostly commercial. I'm not going to be talking too much about residential today, but it follows along. But we're going to give you some numbers. So the question is, how much profit do you want to make? What do you think your overhead ought to be? What's the total markup that you can get? Gross profit, overhead and profit markup. What can you get in a marketplace? So what does it depend on? It depends on how big your company is. The bigger you are, the higher your markup because your overhead's higher. If you have one owner, president, making 100 grand, divided by $1 million, it's 10%. Divided by 10 million, pretty much still 100 grand, maybe 125. It's way less, it's 1%. So it can vary 10% just on that one line item. So if you hire a bookkeeper for 70 grand, divide that by 1 million in sales or divide it by 20 million in sales. It really makes a big difference. So there's no right answer. You can't use those formulas. I think you should use 20%. Well, you can't use those. So the first thing is, what's the right overhead markup? It's not what you think it should be, it's what it is. If your overhead is $1 million per year and you do 10 million, your overhead is a 10% gross margin, which is like 11% markup. Markup's always higher than margin. So you've got to use 11% to cover your nut, to cover what it costs to pay all your bills and break even. Now, if you want to make a profit, that's the variable. Profit is return for the risk that you take. So what's the right markup? Your overhead's what it is, your job costs are what they are, and the net profit is what you can make in the marketplace versus the competitors. So if you're bidding against a lot of bigger contractors, their overhead's going to be significantly less than yours. So you got to be really competitive. You got to mark it up hardly at all. If you're the biggest guy of your competitors in a bid list, you actually have a little extra that you can charge because your overhead's going to be lower than a smaller contractor. So what you have to do is you got to watch the market. It's what you can get. In the general contracting world, where a lot of negotiated jobs are, you tell them you're going to want to get a fee, a contractor fee, overhead and profit markup fee, and it is what it is. They might pay 8%, 6%, 10, 15. That's all you're going to get. So you're going to have to adjust your revenue to cover your overhead and profit because your markup's a fixed number. But if your markup can be adjusted based on the job type and the competition, you can be a little more playful with your thinking and potentially make more money or less if you're not careful. So that's what I want you to think about. So let me just talk about the averages. I have the survey right here, and I'm just going to walk you through. So over the last 5 years, I've studied this, and this study's been going on for years, but I just keep the last 5 years. And so it depends on who you are. So general contractors who perform some work, usually about a third, maybe 20% of the total work, generally have some field costs, which they're going to mark up like a subcontractor. Subcontractors make more money because they do less revenue. And so the theory is, if I'm a general, what should my average markup be? So according to the survey, contractors that average 17 million have an average overhead and markup and profit markup of around 18%. Overhead around 11 or 12 and profit around 5 to 7. That's the average. Now as you get bigger, a company that's doing 35 million is only averaging about 11% total markup. A company that does 72 million is averaging around 9% total. And as you get bigger, it goes down to 7, 6, 5. So you've got to know your competition, but that's the total markup, overhead and profit markup, that your competitors on the average charge. So it's very important. Now if you're a subcontractor, it's totally different. Subcontractors are generally smaller. A $10 million general contractor probably compares to a $3 or $4 million subcontractor in the markup you could get because your overhead is relatively the same, but you're doing less sales. So let's just take a subcontractor that does maybe about, let's say $6 million. The average markup's around 30% overhead and profit. And as you get bigger, you go up to 16 million, it goes down to 25%. And at 30 to 40 million, it goes down to 25%. So the overhead is the variable that goes down. It goes from 25 to 20 to 18 to 15. The net profit's still averaging about 5%. All across the board, almost all contractors in the survey are between 3.5% and 5.5% net profit, plus their overhead based on what it really costs for them to stay open in business. So if we add that all together, I got to be really careful. Now, the third category I like to cover, I have a lot of civil contractors as clients, coaching clients, and also in my mastermind peer groups, and they do earthwork, site utilities, underground pipeline, sewer, water, storm drain, build dams or build waterways, push dirt, rock barriers, maybe retaining walls. And so they are in a different category because they have a much higher fixed cost. They have lots of heavy equipment that costs millions of dollars to own. So their numbers are slightly better. So a civil contractor doing about 16 million is going to average a 20% total markup. A civil contractor doing about 100 million is going to be down around 16%. So most of my civil contractors in the 20 to 30 million dollar sales revenue average are generally about 15 and 5. 15% overhead, 5%. Now, if you want to go broke, use these numbers. If you don't want to go broke, figure them out. If you need some help, you know where to get it. And we can help you. Your CPA can help you. Your controller should know these things. Join the CFMA, but figure out what works for you. And lastly, plumbing, electrical is a little bit higher because it's a little tougher work to do. So think about what you're trying to accomplish here. So as we get into our formulas, think about what you're trying to accomplish. Set your job markup by competitors, job size. I was with a client yesterday who does a lot of $1 million jobs and a whole bunch of $30,000 jobs. He was using 15% for everything. Well, on the big jobs, he can only get a 6 to 8% total overhead and profit markup. And he was only charging 10 on the little jobs. I said, no, get it up to 30. Those are a lot of work for no money. You do a $30,000 job, you make $22,000. Who cares? It doesn't even pay for anything. So let's get it up where it makes it worth your time. Think about what you can do. And lastly, how do you increase your markup? How can you increase your markup? And we'll talk about that a little bit in a future video. But really, real quickly, you've got to improve field productivity. That's hard. And really, you've got to track your job costs. And you've got to have an incentive to bring it in on job cost. Or you can go after higher margin customers. That's the best way to do it, is find customers who are willing to pay more for extra value, extra service, extra TLC, personal care. Maybe the jobs are more difficult. Maybe they require pre-qualifications, certifications. Maybe you've got to be a minority business enterprise, a veteran business enterprise, a SBA, small business enterprise. Whatever it is, you generally have a higher margin in those kind of work where it's more difficult. So think about if it's real easy to get on the bid list, it's real hard to make any money because there's too many competitors that you're competing against that didn't have to qualify to get on the list. Okay, hopefully this gave you a few ideas. Give me a chance to help you. So go on my website called contractorprofitcalculator.com to get my workbook called 12-Step Formula to Always Make a Profit. And I'm going to have these templates, some other things in there to help you figure out what you should charge. And lastly, you're going to get a free copy of my book called Turn Your Construction Business into a Profit-Making Machine, the Biz Builder Blueprint System. All right, so thanks for being here today. Hopefully you'll make a lot of money and someday you'll call me and thank me. See you soon.